Welcome to the Divine Realignment Podcast, Becoming Divine. My name is Julia Wesley. I am a medium and a channel for my guides. And today I have my friend Wendy Cooper with us. She is a fantastic spiritual practitioner. She is an energy channel and a coach. And I wanted to pick her brain today. So, hi, Wendy.
Hi, thank you so much for having me on your show. This is fantastic. It's
Well,
gonna be
thank you
fun.
so much for being here. If I didn't have anybody who wanted to be on, I'd have I'd have no show. So, I know in my work, what I really like to focus on is helping people reclaim a sense of inner authority so that they can start creating
Yeah.
the life that they want to live and make those type of power moves without feeling shaky. And I was looking on your About Me page on wendycooper.com, I believe it is. And like big bold letters, it says, "You are the creator of your life." And I was like, that's exactly what I'm saying. So I would
Mhm.
love to hear your philosophy on that. And how do you see clients? How do you work with clients on that?
Oh goodness. Well, I use the flower archetype in my business a lot. I use flowers for healing as well, but I see people like flowers are having a unique expression. And there's so many different types. And I see people when I actually look at their energy, I see them as a particular flower signature. It's really funny.
Oh, wow.
Because when I was doing mediumship a lot and bridging over into healing and channeling, spirit would give me the names of flowers to help people. Flowers are herbs, and this comes from a long tradition of my fascination and practice with herbalism. But so I started doing these wellness readings. So it was, the flower could be beneficial for them just by looking at the flower or by using flower essence or even an essential oil. And so that kind of, I've had a long love affair with nature and flowers, but then in my coaching work, spirit would give me a flower archetype that I could, and all of this information just, it was like almost an oracle or a divination tool of the flower. So I'd read them like a flower. Spirit would just kind of work through me that way. I think that's how they plug to me in my passion, is to be able to bridge over my coaching work and my healing works. I would see them as this unique flower. I see them as this unique flower archetype. And then it's all about looking to see what is wanting to be revealed. And I really love what you said, helping people be aligned with their authenticity. I love that because it's like peeling an onion, this work, and allowing people the space and their expression to be able to reveal their uniqueness. It's so important that we take this journey here while we're in this third dimensional body to express ourselves and our uniqueness and which goes back to our blueprint, our signature blueprint of how we are designed. And so with I help people reveal more of themselves and what is, I always ask, what is wanting love? Whether it's an emotion or a traumatic event they're dealing with, or a situation or a relationship. When we start really aligning to our hearts and our authenticity, things in our lives kind of get shuffled around. So I provide support for that journey, for their path that they're wanting to follow, but they may have, like, I know that I had, these things I had to, we call them obstacles, but really they're opportunities for more love and more learning. So I just take people on a journey, starting with classes and then one-on-one consultations and then coaching. So,
Oh, I
but it's
love
been a
that.
gorgeous journey getting to that point.
There's so much there that I want to talk about. Let's so the way that you were just getting flowers and they were just
Mhm.
presenting that to you, that actually reminds me of the way that my guides would just give me people's blueprints. Like the way I would see
Yeah.
people is I would see
Hmm.
them as if they were standing in the middle of like a mandala or like a flower or a snowflake
Yeah,
and like a grid.
exactly.
Yeah. And
The snowflake, that just gave me chills.
yeah. And what they were trying to
We're
relate.
all unique.
Exactly. And they're like, this is their unique imprint, their energetic imprint. And I'm like, oh, their blueprint. And I just intuitively understood that. I think it's funny how spirit sort of, if you're willing, they will give you something that you didn't expect. Because
Yeah.
when I was learning, I was expecting to pick up on someone's grandma, and instead they're giving me like blueprint information, and I was like, okay. So when you were saying
I love
tapping
that.
into people's uniqueness, I'm like,
Hmm.
absolutely. And for me in my work in particular, like I cultivate the ego. I feel like I
Yeah.
help heal it in a way because I think it's so
Hmm.
important to our expression. Like that's what
Yeah.
makes us unique, and that's why we're even here. And so
Yes.
I think the healing of it, the expressing it, the honoring the uniqueness, I'm loving everything you're saying.
It's, yeah, and I keep coming back to this. It's like I've set my life up to be the out of the box. And this has come up a lot for me lately, how I have every single time I'm presented with a sameness or an organization, or have been throughout my life, I've stood outside the box, and that's been very meaningful for me as sort of using the medium and the channeling and the energy healing, to form my own, like you have, like spirit's given you the blueprints, and you're like, okay, well, this is very important, to be able to see this and provide this information to someone. So it's like, even though we learn all of these skills, we can still use it for a unique expression of how we're providing our own service.
Mhm.
And I just, I've always kind of like, I don't really, I've taken, courses in Reiki and theta healing, but even putting a title on that, I kind of step back from, because I don't really like titles and boxes. So my whole thing is about getting people out of the box,
Yeah,
just to, if that makes any sense.
it does make sense. I was just talking with a friend the other day about how hard it is to label what I do because
Hmm.
there's so much that's involved in it. Like there's so many aspects of what I do that trying to be like, I'm like, yeah, I should just call myself an intuitive because it seems like a catch-all.
It's hard. Yeah, I go back and forth,
Mhm.
of what I call myself. But like you said, when you're in a session with someone, it all just kind of, it comes out to according to what they are needing. If something needs to be revealed in their shadow, or that's in their aura, that's wanting some attention, or if it's a past loved one who's coming through with this, dire message of love for this healing, so they can both move on. It runs the gamut. It's just like the person is unique. The information that's coming through is unique to them. And so, yeah, if you think of, you can come up with a title, because so many things for heals as well. And since I'm an herbalist, all of this herbal and flower information comes through. But yeah, that's just kind of, yeah, I like the word intuitive. I went there for a while, but really
Yeah.
uncovering or revealing what wants to be revealed. And it all has to do a lot with, as we move into the Aquarius age,
Mhm.
the divine feminine showing up and saying, hi, I'm here. And the divine feminine, I see it, of course, as Gaia working with spirit, but not forgetting the Gaia component, our divine mother.
Yeah.
It can also be termed our subconscious, our intuition that comes from our belly,
Mhm.
also the other. We all have a fear, or our culturally, we have a fear of the other. And it's
Mhm.
interesting how in my thesis, it was a photography sort of movie set of the myth Persephone. And if you know about Persephone, how she goes into the underworld, half the year or whatever, and then like spends the other part, on the upper world. But really allowing ourselves to see these cycles, and the divine feminine that is screaming to be seen. This accepting of the other parts of ourselves, accepting of other people. Because
Mhm.
when we accept others and we accept the parts, we are whole. We see our wholeness, whether it's seeing, as far as this unity consciousness, that we hear a lot and we talk about a lot. It's so true, but we can be it's like we're unified when we see all of the diversity.
Yeah.
We're whole when we see all of the parts and we accept all of the parts, and that means accepting each other as well as all of the parts of ourselves, those parts that we kind of shove into the shadow, that are screaming to be loved. Basically, it's not, and that's what I'm talking about. I mentioned to you this neo-shamanism. It's not looking for the shadow, but looking at to what's wanting to be loved.
Yes.
So I'm not looking for somebody's bad parts. I'm looking to see what is wanting to be revealed from them, which is sort
Mhm.
of a new shamanism, I call it.
I love that, because when you start doing like working with consciousness and you start being
Mhm.
present, and you start paying attention, y- you get sometimes, well, I would get these little flashes of seeing something like a confrontation or something that would have intimidated me or scared me
Mhm.
previously, and I was able to see it as a pain instead of like an aggression, as if the
Yeah,
aggression was just hiding the pain. And that's so true. It's so important because
right.
in terms of coming back to wholeness, you have to see the pain for what it actually is, not just how it's
Yeah.
presenting. And I
Yes.
think that,
There's so much wisdom there.
yeah, and what's cool about it is that you already have this wisdom.
Right.
And as soon as you start paying attention to it, and as soon as you start really focusing on your own consciousness and where you connect into the divine, the all, then you're going to see all of that, and
Yeah.
that you already had all that inherent wisdom. But that reminds me about the thing that you just said about challenges being opportunities. Was that what you
Mhm.
said? And this is
All
something,
opportunities for more love and more love for ourselves. Yeah.
yeah, that's something that when I have a challenge, I want to drop kick it. Like,
I
I'm
know.
mad at it. I don't like that you're here. I don't
Yep.
like that you're making my
Right.
life hard. And the
Same
idea of,
here. I just run. I used to run.
ugh, I get, I'm so, every time it happens, I'm like, did you have to make my life hard? Like, was it not hard
I know. It's
enough?
like I don't want to do this right
Yeah.
now.
Hasn't it been enough? And the idea
Yes.
that actually a challenge is like an opportunity for more love is something that has recently shown up for me as like an idea that like could maybe possibly be true. And the fact that you're saying it again is just another a nudge from spirit to be like, hey, so maybe it is true. So how did you come to that realization? How did you, I guess, change your relationship with challenges?
Because I had so many. I don't know. It was like I was in this process of manifestation, and when excuse me, my eyes a little bit. I started manifesting. There were things that spirit was telling me, like, why am I having to go this obstacle right now? Why this for this bully coming into my life right now? And when I got above it and looked at or got away from it, like and acted as the compassionate witness for myself, I've also practiced getting above it like an eagle, going to that fifth dimensional and up consciousness and looking at it from above. And with my spirit guides, they were saying, this is providing you an opportunity for growth to where you need to be in the frequency for this manifestation that you're trying to, manifest, for this thing that you're trying to manifest. And a lot of it was for a lot of my training was in the past 5 years, just this rapid, ever since I chose this path, it was like rapid acceleration, and that meant challenges or opportunities for growth, as we say it now. So I would have to go through that process to kind of give me the stamina. For me, it was about building boundaries as an empath and really embodying strength, because kindness can be misinterpreted as weakness. So I had to go through all of these people who I brought in to show me that no matter what, kindness is always the answer. And if you stand up for what is right, sometimes, it can have consequences, but it's always the right decision. And those challenges are also not there not only for growth, but also sometimes, like, spirit has given me a vision recently of our shadow coming up to block us from going a path that wasn't meant for us.
Hmm.
So, which I've never seen the shadow kind of illustrated like that, because I've been studying a lot about the shadow, because things have been coming up for me to face a lot in this past 5 years, to see and be healed of things that I've held since childhood that I didn't know I was holding. So that's kind of venturing off into a little bit of soul retrieval work that's kind of part of this. Because I do work with clients who have experienced some trauma, either in childhood or in recent years. So,
Because
yeah, it's it's all a part of that, and it's really thrown me into this work. And as a shaman, if you read about what a shaman is, a shaman is the person who can see both sides. They can see into the shadows, the creativity there, but also the things that we've stuffed there that we didn't want to look at. It's also about helping, like, past loved ones and earthbound spirits who are stuck in that in between dimension. So it's kind of like we see it, but we're holding the light to help them. We're not doing it for them. We're holding the light. And that's this new paradigm of healing that we're moving into, is holding the light, not sending our own energy out, just which can deplete us, but we're channeling source energy, and then sending, or holding the light so they can either step into it or just see it. So it's not like I'm like, this age of the guru and I can help you and save you, and all of this is no.
Mhm.
You're doing your own healing. I think of myself as a facilitator and an energy holder and a seer more than anything.
Yeah.
Because even you, like, even though I can, maybe if I'm reading you, I could see stuff around you, but I also need some, to go to people like my coach, and so she can see around me. So it's like we all help each other in this
Exactly.
process.
And I am always really drawn towards shamanism because I do see that it incorporates wholeness in the respect of
Mm.
the usefulness of the shadow and how we can work with it and how we can heal what we've stuffed in there. And then also holding the light. And I think it's a mark of a true shaman who actually incorporates both of that aspect, because
Mhm.
shamanism is so, in my experience, so grounded
Yeah.
in like reality as it currently is, that to ignore what is there is dishonest in a way. So when
Yeah.
I work with a shaman, her name's Catherine Bird, and she kind of blows my mind because
Yeah.
the work that she produces is so impactful. And I'm like, that's
Mhm.
because you're incorporating wholeness. That's because you're incorporating the
Yes.
whole thing.
And it's grounded because it's very nature based, which is why
Yes.
I'm like, oh, because this, like, when I read more and more about shamanism, because I had had readings that said, yes, you used to be a shaman and a healer in a past life. And I was like, yeah, that sounds all great. But now when I started reading about some coaches who've been doing this for a while, they're really showing me, they're like, this is one term for all you're doing.
Mm-hmm.
If you want a blanket term, it's a shaman, because you're seeing both sides. You're doing everything's nature and Gaia based, as well as source, of course, very nature based. And I see animal totems around people, and I'm like, oh, I'm just bringing all of this through. And I love it so much and it resonates, but it's also, as we move into a different consciousness, this fifth dimensional consciousness, the shaman, like you said, is more about holding light and the wholeness versus finding out what's wrong with people and just pointing out their
Yeah.
that's not what, it's like you just seeing it in a positive way, like what is the light, what is wanting to come into the light,
Yes.
to be
Exactly.
revealed. Yeah.
Hmm. And that's interesting that you say that. My guides have been bringing to me this concept of, which is not new, but like a keeper of the light, as someone who
Yeah.
just maintains it and holds it and sort of
Yeah.
just sort of lights the path. Um,
Right.
it the imagery they keep showing me is like someone, like a huge statue in a library that's holding this really big light, and it's the only light around. And it's funny because they keep showing me this imagery again and again, and I'm like, okay, that like I'm starting to get it now. Thanks, guys.
Yeah.
Um, and what I think is kind of shifting gears a little bit, but the mark of someone who's taking this seriously is
Mhm.
also a spiritual practitioner who keeps going to other spiritual practitioners to work on themselves.
Yes.
That's so important, I think. And I think
Right.
when you're looking for someone to work with, a spiritual practitioner to work with, you have to say, like, is this person still working on them?
Yes.
Because if they're not, I think that's a red flag.
Yeah. I wish I could always get to that point of not keeping myself. I'm kidding. We do have to take breaks, but when you two things with that, I totally agree. We always are continually, even coaches have coaches.
Uh-huh.
And when you're talking about keepers of the light, Spirit gave me a very similar vision of when I was going through a meditation being led by Lauren Interfermo, and you may know her, but she was leading us to this meditation, and I had seen where before I was like Little Red Riding Hood in the woods, and before I was devoured
Mm.
by the wolves and the bears and the bullies. I was just devoured. They were devouring me. And then they showed me, after we went through this sort of healing thing, they showed me a new vision of myself walking through the woods, holding the light. I was lighting the path. So the grizzly bear and the wolf or whatever had devoured me before, they were coming into, it was like I was lighting up the forest.
Ooh.
And it was such a shift. It is exactly what you're talking about.
Mm-hmm.
So we're getting this as a collective,
Yeah.
this new fifth dimensional consciousness for those who are actually on this path, because you're not the only one that said keeper of the light to me recently.
And you want to hear something else that's freaky? So we have one of
Yeah.
our we have one of our teachers, Hillary Michaels, in common, and I went to one of her workshops, and she did a chakra meditation on us just to get us used to our energy. And I went into my solar plexus energy, and I had this incredibly vivid um, imagery come to me of I'm walking in a dark forest, and all of a sudden I am this bright yellow light. And they're like, that's your only job, is to be this bright yellow light, because you don't need to run around spreading light everywhere. You just need to be where you are. And anything who needs light will recognize it in you and then recognize it in themselves. And so
Yeah.
when you said in the forest imagery, I was like, ooh, we also have
Yeah.
that.
It was like I was the light bulb. It was sort of like the hermit
Yes.
archetype in tarot, where he's
Mhm.
holding the lantern. He's not really there's no efforting anymore. In
Uh-huh.
general, even when we're manifesting, it's more about seeing how you can be open to receive,
Oh, yeah.
which a lot of us have trouble doing,
I know I do.
and even in healing. Mhm.
Yeah. If I'm going to tell on
Exactly.
myself a little bit, I have a hard time receiving, because, and this is definitely shadow work, but receiving is always tied to the need to like give back. So if someone just gives something to me out of the blue, I'm like, oh, hold on. This seems unbalanced, and it freaks me out. So the idea of receiving, I wonder if you've worked on that at all. And if
Oh, yeah.
you,
I've
yeah.
been working on that for about a year now
Okay.
with my business, and I've gotten it very, very strongly. And I have an affirmation. It's actually on my mirror, and it says, I am open to receive. And so that is really also opening myself to channel information and to
Ooh.
receive in a way that that I can deliver to, for anybody who wants to hear it. So when I kind of, when my mediumship was going over into channeling, it just kind of happened. Um, that's when I was like, oh, I got it. I can receive now. Like, of course, I still have to take action on certain things, but after I'm aligned and after I'm, in that position of receiving and co-creating with spirit. So I'm one of those people who, in my entire life, I've always been a go-getter. I've always
Mm-hmm.
gotten every certificate possible. I've just been this because I love education.
Yeah.
And I was a professor for a while, so I've always been that researcher and thirsty for knowledge. And they're like, you have the wisdom, like you said earlier. That came through one of my coaches. They're like, you have the wisdom, it's opening to receive it.
Mm.
I was like, wow, this is totally shifting everything.
Yes.
you know
And so I'm a Capricorn. And so I am very much if it's going to be done, it's going to be done by me kind of an
yeah,
energy. And I
that's my
also,
opposite sign.
oh, you're a Cancer?
So you're like the father-ish of the zodiac. I'm like the mother. So we're definitely go-getters.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. And it's funny that you mentioned being a professor. I was incredibly science academic,
Mm,
entrenched in it. And so when I
hmm.
came into sort of spiritualism, I guess for lack of a better term, it was
Yeah,
such a hard uh like right turn for me to be
yeah,
like, it was almost like a whiplash sort of a situation, but it is the accumulation of knowledge that I adore. And I
yeah.
think that if you're someone who's like looking for secrets and looking for answers, I was talking to a friend
Yeah.
the other day and like, I know people like they either end up being a scientist or a spiritualist because um
That's hilarious. And I still love science. I love, botany, and I
mhm,
love energy, the science of energy, of course, now. But it's like detective work. I've always been in love
yes.
with the mystery. And when you said
Uh-huh.
finding the mystery, I'm like, yes. I've always wanted to be like Nancy Drew, but they had a modern version when I was growing up. Her name was Trixie Belden.
Oh my
And
god.
I was obsessed. Like, I'm obsessed with the mystery, and
Mm.
it's all
Hmm.
coming together now in the coaching work class, the
Yes.
classes I'm doing. So
Yeah.
it's funny.
And it's funny that you mentioned Nancy Drew. We have so many similarities. When I was a kid, my mom and I used to play those computer Nancy Drew games, like obsessed, because I am also obsessed with mysteries. And I
I
love,
love it.
yeah, of like discovering something. And actually, I think that's probably what keeps me going, why I love to channel, because it's almost like
Mm,
I have a question and I can actually ask and then actually get an answer.
I know. I love
It's
that
so beautiful.
too. And I've had to surrender so much to that more and more. And it's been a great learning experience the past 2 years when I've channeled my own answers. It's like, oh, it's so much more empowering
Yes, it
that we
definitely
can do
is.
that.
Because it removes the idea of going back to the guru, of
Yeah,
needing someone else to tell you the answers. And I do think a good guru is someone who just turns you back to yourself for answers.
totally.
But I think we have a sort of a twisted idea of what a guru is, of
Yeah.
someone who is here to tell you what to do, which grinds my
Yeah. And
gears.
they exist.
Yes,
They
they do.
exist. I've had
Yeah.
experience.
Yeah. And that's
But
nuts.
yeah.
Especially because as a Capricorn, and as a kid, even, I was always someone who was very sure of what I wanted and what I wanted to do. And if anybody told me any different, oh boy,
Yeah.
And so I've tempered it a little bit, but it still shows up when I interact with in a spiritual circle where there's a lot of sort of like fawning over a particular,
Yeah.
sort of like, this is so unhealthy to me. And I
Yeah.
think that anyone out there who's looking for like a spiritual lineage to follow, I would just say definitely look for someone who tells you that you have the answers and just helps you
Oh,
find
yes.
them.
So true.
Yeah.
Yeah. I have my body is so hardwired to like sense that I automatically rebel from anything that is, you know, taking you away from that light of yourself, or that takes the power away from you, the self.
Yes.
I'm like, oh no. I get like all of my alarm bells go off and I rebel. Like if anybody tries to put me in that box, or even if something is, this goes to growing up and my experience with going to a Christian school all of my life, and also being raised in a church that wasn't seeing the whole picture like
Mhm.
I was. And so if anything is even resembles that kind of organization, where there's like a structure and a head, I'm like, no, that's I can't do
Yes.
that.
You're preaching to the choir here. I grew up in Catholicism,
Hmm.
and the idea of even when I was a kid, I was like, so only this guy gets to talk to God, but I have to go through what makes him
Yeah,
special, because
right,
he has testicles. I don't understand what makes that magical. You know, and
right.
so,
It's like I knew in my body at 7 that they weren't seeing the whole picture.
uh-huh. Yeah.
I felt the judgment,
Yeah.
and
That's,
I'm really sensitive to that
yeah.
now, even.
Do you think that your like inner alarm system, do you think that that relates to the shadow function of keeping you from going down
Oh,
the track that you don't want?
oh, I just had a recent experience, Julia, of this. And yes, it was my shadow being triggered. It
Hmm.
was a pain body being triggered. That, it was actually the same kind of shame I felt as a little girl. And my two family members who are not my parents, who always had this judgment mental and thing about it, about them. And I knew they were judging me for not choosing that path, and they still do. And it's been a hurtful thing for me, not wanting it, but also not being accepted for who I am. But my shadow, like this shame was being triggered. The shame from this childhood was being triggered by this instance that came up. And I was like, whoa. I had this take afternoon off. And I said to my spirit guides, I was like, what is this? Why is this shame keep coming up? And they said, with my process, well, ask what it needs. Ask what the emotion, what it needs. Ask Wendy what she needs. And so Wendy's shadow said, well, this emotion, the shadow, whatever you want to call it,
Hmm.
said the shame that we're carrying a lot of shame as a collective as women anyway.
Yeah.
But it said she needs to be loved and accepted for who she is. And I said, if these people can't give it to me, then that is my shadow saying that's not for you.
I
Because
love.
you have these people over here who do love and accept you how you are. So that is a perfect example of what you just said, of my shadow keeping me from something that's not meant for me. And
Yeah.
it also gave me clarity on the title of my book and this new collective I'm working on. And it's called The Wildflower,
Ooh.
and how wildflowers don't fit in a box.
Yeah.
If you try to put me in a box, I'm going to crawl out. And if you trigger, this, what's, and the reason it's triggering me is because it's leading me to my purpose.
Oh, I love this, Wendy.
Yeah.
Yes.
It's like, wow. And I was just like, so the shadow is multifunctional. It like it triggers us to keep us out of harm, but it also allows us to go move through it and gain clarity of where our path does lie.
Yes. That's a really beautiful way to relate to the shadow, as because I think that we have a tendency to relate to the shadow as we would relate to pain from someone else. We get angry at it. We don't know how to deal
Yeah.
with it. But to relate to the shadow as someone who's just trying to help you and to bring something to your attention, I think is
Mm-hmm.
beautiful. And I think in your specific situation, at least speaking for me, we have a tendency to think that we need to get along with everybody. And so we have to fix a
Right.
relationship. But the idea that we can just let go of something that's not working and allow people to follow their own path while I follow my own path is not only a gift to yourself, but also a gift to that other person who you feel
Yes.
is rejecting you that love. And
Totally.
in terms of healing that situation, the way you described it, I don't know if there's any other better way to do it. Because if you're just not going to see eye to eye with someone and you never are, cut those
Yeah.
losses.
Yeah. Totally. Don't keep hanging on like a cancer, thinking you have everything,
Mm,
because I can't.
yes.
And I'm not, and it's funny because this experience that I had also showed me of it was my ego, like not the ego that as expression, but the ego that comes in to kind of control
Hmm.
the negative aspect of the ego.
Hmm.
um, I actually was almost having a little bit of identity crisis, because what I thought I wanted, I didn't want,
Yeah.
really. When I got really down in my heart, I
Uh-huh.
was like, holy crap, I don't even want that.
Yeah.
And it was like, what do I do now?
Uh-huh.
But then when I went further and got the clarity on what to do now,
Yeah. Isn't that
I
funny?
was like, holy crap.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like as soon as you start letting go of something that just maybe was never coming to you and was never going to, and you
Yeah.
think that you
Like
want it so
almost.
much. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And you're like, I don't want that. And then it literally, I've had that happen to me where it triggered an existential crisis. Who am I? What am I even here to do?
I'm like, I don't even know what to do now. I'm like, oh.
Yeah. Exactly. Oh, I love that so much. Thank you for sharing that. Because I think, personally, in terms of relationships that I've had with other people who can, for some reason, I feel like they just can't figure out how to love me. Like, is that so
Mm,
hard?
yeah,
You
right.
know, like I don't feel like I'm wanting for much, but I think that it's just a process of honoring how you know how to love and how someone else knows how to love, and how we're probably all just doing the best we can. And we're
Yeah.
just not going the same way.
Right. And we're here to teach each other too. So maybe this other person, maybe I'm definitely feeling like I'm triggering something in the other person that they don't
Mhm.
want to look at.
Yeah.
And I know that, but that's their thing. But I see it, and I see how we all come into our lives to learn. Either we learn from it and move on, or we don't, or there's people that are also meant to stay in your life.
Hmm.
But wow, it's been a big journey. I feel like I've reinvented several times throughout my life. If you look at my history, it's like, but it all actually has a string
Yeah.
that's leading up to this point.
Isn't that
It's
weird?
not random like it looks. Yeah,
Yeah. Because it feels like you're going like this, but it
right.
probably, if you look like from an expanded perspective, it probably is a straight line, but we're here over here feeling like we've got whiplash.
I
Um,
know.
the way that
So
you
funny.
describe your relationship with your guides, not that it's not
Hmm.
personal, but it does seem like a working relationship. Like we're going to work, because the way that you related to that situation with your family members, and the way that you relate to working with your guides in it, it reminds me of how I know other shamans work with the situation. So do you feel that the way you related to that situation was tied into your neo-shamanism?
Now that you say it, yes. I'm very aware of it, but it's funny how pulling it myself, yeah, they're saying, actually I'm hearing now that it was part of my training,
Hmm.
be able to see more and learn more about the shadow, because I've been obsessed with it. It's just keeps coming up for me.
Yeah.
Um, so yes, the short answer is yes, for sure,
Yeah.
definitely.
And then I wanted to ask you, what is your process for working with your guides? Because it seems like a cultivated and intentional one. And you probably have guides specific to what you do and guides for something else. But uh, I know people who take this seriously, I know that they also take their communion with their guides very seriously. And
Mhm.
did it take you a while to come to that process, or was it pretty intuitive and natural?
Gosh, this is a great question. Um, there was a point where I had too many, I guess, entities and spirits coming in to work with me, where I had to clean out
Hmm.
and really firm up my boundaries and even upgrade my gatekeeper guides. But I do work with them. I work with different guides for specific projects. Like for my for a class, I'll say, Isis has been a guide for my high priestess class. I work with nature spirits a lot, like a lot, like animal spirits and nature spirits. But I also work with interdimensionals. But I will tell you, my right hand guide is Archangel Michael. And I feel like he stands right beside a lot of empathic, healers.
Yeah.
And I mean, Archangel Raphael is always there too. And it's like they're always around me. Every session, they're always standing on either side. And I know I have a wisdom guide who helps with my teaching. I know that there's, Isis comes in as a psychic, like with the clairvoyance, but really more and more, Julia, I'm accessing my higher self and working with my higher self, source, and Gaia, and just keeping it really simple. Although I love my angels, they've helped me through so much. It's incredible. And
Yeah.
I love how we can just call on them. I call on them for everything.
Yeah.
But I'm really trying to focus more on working with my higher self more and more.
Yeah. When you said my, I
It's
was like,
pretty
she's
funny.
gonna say Archangel Michael. I know she's gonna say it. And I have kind of a, so what I do, I know my angels are there. I'm getting embarrassed. And I work with them, but it's almost like I take them for granted because they're always
Yeah,
there. So
yeah,
the
yeah.
way that I relate to Archangel, it's like I can't give him he's like Uncle Mike. like
Yeah.
he's there, and it's an informal kind of relationship because
Hmm.
my issues with authority won't allow me to give my guides any sort of authority over me. And so I do also feel like I
I
work
love
with
that.
my higher self a lot. I think it's
Yeah.
kind of petulant of me, if you will, but it's like how I have to relate to them.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that's nice of you to
I
validate.
totally get that. Like, I totally get what you're saying. And I try not to take them for granted too, because, they're always there, I feel.
Yeah. But when I listen to other people talk about their guides, they always seem to have this great reverence for them. And I'm like, they're just people, you know?
Yeah.
They-
I
they're great. They're here.
Yeah, you are so funny. You're like, I bet you were like, I had a medium tell me one time, you were a really precocious little girl, and you were too. I just know that.
Yeah.
It came, it's like, okay, yeah, we've been around this spot before. What are we doing?
Yeah, exactly. And it's funny because I took an Akashic Records course with Lauren Antofermo,
Yeah,
and I was having such a hard time receiving the information my guides were giving me about my records because they thought it was
yeah.
like new age eagle fluffing, like race consciousness and rainbow child. And I'm like, can you
Right.
just be real with me? Can you just
Yeah.
not give me this not? And they're like, okay, whatever. Like, and so every time I would go in, they would give me the same information. And honestly, it's only been the last couple of months where I was able to be like, so what do you mean by rainbow child? And they actually gave me the information. They're like, you're just not pulling on karma from other lifetimes and yada yada. And I
Right.
was like, oh, so that's not, because my understanding of what that was based on what everyone else on the internet told me about it was a little funny. But it's the idea that I can
Oh
only
God.
relate. And I was so precocious as a child. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Like I knew what was right. I knew absolutely. And the idea that
And that's what I love about you. It's like I've known that. I don't like you and I haven't had a lot of direct, interaction as far as just one on one.
yeah.
But I just, like we're friends on Facebook and I follow you and you've been in some other groups and I'm like, I like her. Oh, like she's spunky. And you remind me of me, and I'm just like, oh my God, yes, I love that fire.
Yeah, I've got the fire. And it's funny because I've always been drawn to your group as well. And I love that you work with, I've always been drawn to wildflowers. And I love
Yeah.
that that's going to be the name of your book because I do love how they're spunky and they will not be tamed and they'll grow wherever they want to.
Yeah.
And I'm like, isn't that just a symbolism of like the indomitable spirit of nature and humanity in general? But I'm also fascinated about how you see people as flowers. And as soon as you
Yeah.
said that, I was like, am I a tulip? Because I love tulips. They're my favorite flower. And
That's
so,
so
do you
funny.
see it as like an archetype of what someone is currently embodying, or do you see it the way that some people see auras? Um,
Yes. I see it as what they are, more like their blueprint, how
okay.
they express themselves and why they are expressing themselves that way, and how this relates to their work they're doing.
Oh, love that.
And it may, they're saying, I'm asking if it could change. They're saying, yes, it could morph. That really is their signature identity
Mm.
as how they're bringing it forth in this lifetime. Now, the flower that they could give me for healing would be a different flower.
Oh, okay.
Could be a different flower. Yeah. So a lot comes through, when I'm doing that. It's crazy, but spirit always just lands it right there, because I was reading someone and I said, for this reading, spirit's asking me for you to pick your favorite flower and bring a picture of it to the session. And it was the information that I read through that flower. Like I was literally looking at the flower and reading through it and getting this information, channeling it basically, was what they needed to hear in that moment. And this was her signature flower that she actually chose and brought. It's a beautiful story around even the name of the flower, but I can't for privacy purposes, but it
Yeah.
was really beautiful. And I love that, spirit speaks to us through things and, our joy, and flowers have always been my joy. It sounds so simplistic, but my favorite thing to do is either arrange flowers, grow them, or go out into a garden, and so how I am able to incorporate that really holds my passion for this work. we're talking about, that reminds me, when we're talking about that string of events in our life, that even though it looks random,
Mhm.
my thesis show in photography, like photography taught me about light and shadow. And I still look into shadows outside. I'm still getting more information about our shadow and how it works when we're light, and how in three-dimensional form, it's like you have to have light and shadow to make a three-dimensional form. And it's just
Yeah.
like, there's so much there,
Yes.
but it's being kind of unwrapped like a present. But that photography in my thesis show was all about, it's all about mystery. They're all shot like a movie scene in a mystery format, shot from 3 points of view: the victim, the witness, and the perpetrator. And so now I'm seeing how we are all those things too, if we're identifying with either one of them. And the point of view that we hold is so important to how we manifest. Like our perspective, if we
Oh,
get that higher perspective, is so important to how everything's going to fall around us in our aura, in our vortex, if you will. As Abraham 6 says, vortex. But now I'm like, I'll put that in my vortex. But it's really about that perspective, because if you look at things that are bad coming into your life as bad, then that's one perspective, or you can look at it as an opportunity.
I love that. And that actually clears up a lot of how I've been screwing up my manifestation. They're like, you're not screwing up your manifestation. It just seems super slow to me because I'm someone who
Yeah.
wants everything right now.
Yeah, me too.
So I do tend to take the victim perspective on my manifestation because it feels like it's outside of my control and there's nothing I can do about it. And I was just talking to a friend the other day about surrender. Is
Mm.
that an active or a passive sort of state of being? And she's like, it's right smack dab in the middle.
It
And
is, because you have to feel it in your body, and that's an action, and that you have to release in your body to feel what surrender feels like.
yeah, right. Yeah. And she uses yoga to help me with that. And it wasn't
Hmm.
until I was like, oh, so I have to be willing to be here to surrender. Like it's almost like an active choice
Hmm.
to surrender to it. And so I think that's what, now that you mention it like that,
Ah,
that's the perspective I've been taking in my manifestation.
I love that. And instead of, this reminds me about this imagery I was studying. I don't know why this is coming up so profoundly right now in my thesis show. I was studying the figure of the Pieta, where
Mm.
where Jesus is. It's the image in Renaissance art and in other periods of art, classical art, in 19th century art, where Jesus is, it's the dead figure, but it's the graceful, beautiful form of surrender, versus the other images of that being something else. And that was, my thesis show was not about the text, it was about the subtext, the reading in between the lines. And when you were talking about oh, I lost my train of thought, but it was like, oh, looking at it, yeah, it was about the subtext and reading between the lines, and the divine feminine wanting to come out.
Mhm.
But and I was like, there's one way to look at things. I could, if these murder mysteries I was creating, I wasn't about the blood and guts, because my professors were like, why aren't you showing it more graphic? Because I was like, well, hey, that's not me. And then this one professor who got me said, no, interested in the subtext. And it's about this image of surrender and not the blood and gore, but like all of my images had the Pieta form in it, as this
Oh,
beautiful surrendering to the death. It was like the metaphor of the death and rebirth, not the literal um, interpretation of it, like so many people do about everything.
yeah.
It's like, no, look beyond that, look into the shadows and look at the wisdom there, look at what is hidden.
Yeah.
And it takes us back to that surrendering to the mystery, surrendering to what is wants to come in. And we
Hmm.
have to move out of our, like, I literally see my ego kind of shifting out of the way, or my body kind of shifting out of the way
Yeah.
when I channel even. But
Yes.
yeah, when my clients have said surrendering, I'm like, oh, I finally get it now. You have to feel it in your body.
Hmm. That's been true with me. If I don't incorporate all of myself into it, then I
Hmm.
keep it compartmentalized. And so it's
Yeah,
not complete and it's not whole. And
right.
one of the other things, when you mentioned the Pieta, I was also ability to be held, to allow yourself to
Oh,
be held.
yes.
And then in the
That's so
trust.
Gaia.
Hmm.
There's a meditation I do. I'm just like when I go through a portal in our hearts and just allow yourself to be held with Gaia. It's like, wow.
Yeah.
And even just going out and lying face down on the ground and speaking your prayers into Gaia is transformational. So I encourage you to try that too.
Yes.
But
And when I go into corpse pose in yoga and it's the full surrender, and I
yeah,
find myself having a hard time. I try and hold myself instead of fully letting go, because it's the idea that someone wants to hold me and that someone
mhm,
is there to support. And because I'm such a type A, I'm always like, well, I'll just take care of it. But the idea of like a full surrender, like I
yeah,
think that uh like it requires so much trust, don't you
yeah.
think, to do
Those
that?
two words come up all the time in my coaching, and it's what most people we hang on. I've totally still learning to do that and feeling it in my body. And there's still, every time I totally surrender, there's still a little part of me,
Yeah.
that I'm working on. I
Yeah.
don't know. It's new information comes forward every time of what I'm holding on to.
Hmm.
But yeah, even surrendering is a healing process.
And I think it's because I think I know myself too well, and I'm like, I'm a little bit of a shit. So I'm not sure why would like I wouldn't necessarily want to hold up someone exactly like me, because I'm a little work. And
Yeah,
so
me
the
too,
idea,
believe me.
yeah, the idea that someone is accepting of the whole, the shadow, the
Mhm.
light, the wholeness of it, is like transform, like make you cry, kind of transformative.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly. And it's like I love now, and photography taught me too, the beauty in imperfection.
Yeah. Ooh, yeah.
I'm so all about that right now. And just people, like I find people beautiful when they're quirky and when they're
Mm,
not perfect
mhm.
and when they're just letting it all show whatever it is, whatever emotion it is. I just love when people show that because I find vulnerability very beautiful. So it
Yeah.
kind of erases that whole, we're not supposed to be perfect, and it's like our culture, of course, we're indoctrinated, even in not only our culture, but in the churches, it's like this stupid idea of perfection just really kind of makes me laugh. And
Yeah.
I've had to, overcome that myself, always trying to be perfect when I was little and, meet everybody's expectations when my parents were like, well, we really didn't have any expectations. You put that on yourself.
That's exactly what my parents said. I used to be one of those kids who I took every AP class. I had like college credits before I graduated high school. All this pressure on myself, and my parents were like, do you want to like go do something you can never tell us about? Like, you want to sneak out? And I was like, no.
So, me too. I was like, no, I don't, I want to go to sleep. I don't want to sneak out.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh
And
my God.
you were talking about, what was the thing? Our uniqueness. Oh, this is where I was going with it. The idea that our uniqueness is special and that someone wants to hold us in it and honor it.
Hmm. Hmm.
I just realized that I have a hard time honoring what makes me quirky in myself. And that is why I have such a hard
Hmm.
time believing
Hmm.
anyone else would.
Yep.
Yeah.
Because
Epiphanies.
every time, yeah, like you even talk about surrender, it's like, oh, well, oh, I don't want to surrender that.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, why not?
Mhm.
That's
Yep.
beautiful though. Yeah, I have a hard time. Well, I'm not want to say that. I want to speak that into existence, but yes, it's been quite an experience for me to accept, and I still work on that, accept everything about me. Another good affirmation that I use is I completely love and accept myself.
That's a good one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
And I just realized that the reason I was having such a hard time, again, I don't want to speak it into existence. The reason I'm making it hard for myself to receive abundance is because I am not accepting the abundance, the fullness of it that's within myself. I keep
mhm.
compartmentalizing little things that I don't think are acceptable, or that I think that, that I have placed in the shadows. And so to not see myself as a source of abundance, I think is probably holding me back as well.
Mhm. Yeah, I've really been working a lot around this idea of manifestation too, and not putting so many perfect expectations around it. It's through my manifestation, it's also allowed me to learn complete and utter acceptance of what is,
Ooh.
which is like the opposite. And I'm like, oh. I'm like, well, how can you have both? They're like, well, you have to accept what is and be grateful, but on a like really radical acceptance. I've had some things where I'm like, I can't change that. I
Yeah.
can't. That is like something I cannot change. And that's really, been challenging. But
Yeah.
that's kind of helped me get to the point where, okay, surrendering to spirit, because spirit does have my highest good in mind, and trusting that has been a leap.
Yeah. Right. I had a reading one time where I think it was probably Archangel Michael, when he was like, "You don't always know best." And I was like, "You want to fight me?" Like, I think I do.
I know, right? I'm
Yeah.
like, no, I'm so stubborn too. Yeah. That's so funny.
And then I remember one last question before we start wrapping this up.
Yeah.
You mentioned that I think the flowers in the blueprint, like they have a lot
Mhm.
of things in common. And so you were saying, when you see someone as a flower, sometimes it can be sort of like their archetype. And then sometimes you bring in a different flower, like it can be different for healing. And so
Right.
when I heal by aligning someone to their blueprint, I just give them more of their blueprint. The idea of adding something else is something that's intriguing to me. So do you sometimes find that in healing, you just give them more, or how they end up being the same flower? Like when is it when someone needs a different energy? Can you give?
Yeah, I mean, it comes up a lot, and I'm still kind of working through how that's manifesting itself through these readings, because I started doing just the flower readings, but then it's coming up more just in a general reading as well.
Mhm.
But how it all started, when I was studying sacred geometry, which I'm kind of obsessed with, and the flower of life, and how our blueprint as a human is based on the flower of life, and everything in creation is based on this kind of energetic sacred geometry of a flower.
Mhm.
And our hearts are the first organ that comes out of the embryo. It's the first organ that is created. So it's truly like through that embryo, which is shaped like a flower, I think it's like the third stage. Through that is our heart is actually coming through that flower blueprint, which kind of was like, oh, it's like our heart is like this flower blueprint anyway, and then there's so much more wrapped up in that. So if it's offered, if the person is actually getting a flower archetype reading, it all comes around to offering the same information as they would have if they just did a basic reading. So I'm actually working on my services just to do that as one session, and explaining how the information comes through, and how my portal is their flower, or how I see them as a unique flower.
That's really cool.
Yeah.
And I am, to me, someone's blueprint is sort of like their unique kind of flower of life. That's how I saw it as well. I love all these overlaps in our work.
Yeah, I knew, but I've been like, I've always, ever since I don't know what our first interaction was. It was some class, probably the Akashic Records.
Mhm.
And I just was like, how you have the energy waves of when something is kind of resonating. I'm like, she's something. I know her. It's just a frequency resonance, and it just was like, oh, that's so cool. And then I don't know, I have a lot of respect for how you present yourself and what you do, and your feistiness. I really can relate to that a lot.
It is feistiness, isn't it?
No, that's not right. I'm like,
Yeah.
I really have to, Cancers and Capricorns have that sort of like stand up for the underdog type thing. And it's like, okay.
Yep. Yeah, that's funny. And I have been sort of like watching your work from afar. And every time you do something, I'm like, that's beautiful. I love how you think about it like that. I love how you manage to, because I've received readings from you, and you always package them in a way that is pretty, something that feels good. You walk away feeling lighthearted is the word I want to use.
Oh,
And I think
good.
that's the energy that you need in order to make changes in your life,
Mm. Oh,
to
so
feel
true.
the openness of it.
Mhm.
Sometimes
The lightness of being.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. And you know what's
Yeah.
funny is I interviewed Lauren Antoifermo for one of these podcast
Yeah.
episodes,
Oh, I
and
love her.
we were talking about the Akashic Records intensive,
Yeah.
and I was saying, I was almost like apologizing because that was when I had all this information about Rainbow Child, and I was like, "Can you explain that?" You know,
I remember that.
I was asking all the hard questions, and I'm like, "Hey, I'm sorry." I was so annoying. And she's like, "I remember that now that you said it." I'm like, "I should just stop bringing it up because it's kind of embarrassing."
No,
But
I thought it was a great question because I was always kind of the same thing, like, what? What does that actually mean? And I was actually shown some rainbow healing several months later. But you know what you just said about lightness of being, or lightness, goes back to something else you said earlier that I wanted to comment on. It's like you're making my brain neurons like fire like crazy because everything you say is sparking another thing. But it's like
yeah,
really our only job is keeping our frequency light. If we can just like focus on that, and just offering that, it's work to get. And it's not work.
I know.
It's not like we're sitting around doing nothing. That's the opposite.
Mhm. Yeah, exactly. And I was just gonna say one more thing. I feel like I could interview you for 2 hours, but
I have coffee time.
it's
Or
already been
tea
an
time.
hour. Can you believe it? This
No,
one.
I've had a blast. This is,
Yeah, I
yeah,
did too.
everything
Thank you
is.
so much. Um, yeah, forget it. Forget that last question. But anyways, I was gonna say, how can the people find you? How can they work with you? Do you have anything going on right now?
I do. My website is wendymichellcooper.com. And I'm about to launch, I haven't launched it yet, is I'm working on this wildflower collective group that's going to have feature flower healing journeys and a lot of plant spirit medicine, as well as flower essences. So I'm working on that. But yeah, just I have a group called Bloom. I think you remember.
Yep.
So we just talk about metaphysical things, all things that are mysterious in that group. So kind of it doesn't really have a. I kind of left it open, but really it's about soul aligned manifestation, which we're all very interested in, of course, in
Love it.
alignment. So thank you.
Thank you.